God creates space for you to get that off your chest and to allow that to be heard and seen. Genesis 16 is actually a story, if you guys are familiar with Abraham and his wife Sarai. At this time, they're named Abram and Sarai, contemplating with one another to basically get some surrogacy going on with Hagar, who's an Egyptian handmaid who they brought up out of Egypt when they initially went down to Egypt, a place that they were not supposed to go. So Sarai gets connected. Sarai, same person. They get connected. They are like, yo, Hagar, I'm giving this permission because clearly, as she states in the text in Genesis 16, God does not intend on coming through with this. So they're basically coming up with a plan together to move through surrogacy with Hagar. And they go through with it. Okay? They go through with it. Hagar becomes pregnant as Abraham, by way of Sarah's permission, goes in, has sex with her. And then all of a sudden we start understanding in the text, the very next verse after this has happened, it's explained that Hagar has contempt for Sarah, and she now starts to move as if she's better than her. You know, at this cultural time, women who were married and pregnant and were able to bear children, their status was a lot higher than women who didn't, right? Women who didn't have children, who weren't married, who were widowed, like they were literally the next thing to dirt. Having children with women was a flex. So obviously Hagar's moving that way. And Sarah brings this to Abram's attention, in which Abram replies, hey, this is your servant, so do what you please. So I want to take you now to the verses that we're going to be kind of looking at. Abram replied, look, she is your servant, so deal with her as you see fit. Then Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. Obviously, Sarah has retaliated. She's responded very harshly. We can only intend on understanding how harsh this was. We could assume that there were some words said, some actions, maybe some hands were put on somebody. Who knows, right? Let's just, for exegetical imagination, there was definitely not an alignment here. And Hagar feels extremely tensified, pressured. Her emotions are everywhere. She's very much dysregulated if we went that route of understanding the context of where she's at. Her emotions are all over the place, and it's a very hectic, chaotic scene to be a part of. So Hagar takes off. We don't really know where Hagar plans on going. We just know she runs, right? Maybe you've been in a situation like that where the emotions are so crazy, you're just like, yo, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm got to get out of here. Okay, I got to get out of here. I don't know what next relationship is going to look like. I don't know what the next marriage is going to look like. I don't know I just got to go. I got to get out of here. So she made the decision to leave. Verse 7 reads this. The angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring of water in the wilderness along the road to Shur. The angel said to her, Hagar, Sarai's servant, where have you come from and where are you going? To which she replied, I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai. So what's important about these next couple verses is Hagar doesn't really know where she's going. We just know she's leaving the premises and the environment in which she's being emotionally cratered. She's being hurt. And it's in the midst of her running somewhere that she goes far, but clearly not far enough out of the reach of God. Because between her leaving the environment that she was in, where a lot of the emotional pain was happening, and to whatever extent she was looking to run, okay, no matter the distance, God catches her in the middle. And the angel of the Lord asked two questions. Where you come from and where are you going? And this is such a phenomenal question to be asked to somebody who is frantic, dysfunctional, maybe not dysfunctional, but dysregulated, and is very much so caught up in the moment. It's heavy. It's hurtful. She's wounded. And she's really trying to navigate where to go, but those emotions are so all over the place, she really can't even see. But she's aware enough and in tune enough to be able to stop and sit down to have a conversation with the angel of the Lord here and entertain the question by giving an answer and saying, I am running from Sarai, my mistress. And I think what this points to is her willingness to just stop running, sit down, and be grounded enough in the present to give an answer to a question that literally changes the entire trajectory of where she thought she was going. With her heartbreak, with her wound, with her emotional dysregularity, she stops, answers, and now, as the story unfolds, the angel of the Lord promises her that she's going to bear a son. He's going to name him Ishmael, all of the characteristics that's going to come with him. But then I want you to skip down to verse 13, where after God, the angel of the Lord, gives all this, it says, thereafter Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. She said, you are the God who sees me. You are the God who sees me. And I think what this implies is that there was a part of her in the midst of that emotional experience that was at its peak when she left Sarai and Abram. She did not feel seen in any kind of way in that experience. And yet, even though no one else saw her, and again, this isn't the point. Now, let me finish this and then I'll come back to it, because I do want to make this prevalent in the text. Again, the implicit messages in it. Let me finish real quick and then we'll catch up. Okay, just follow along. She isn't seen, but God sees her. The pain, the internal wound and conflict that she's messing with, it's there. God sees her. God speaks directly to her heart in this moment as he's catching her very so tenderly in the middle and deals with her heart so gently that it encourages her to go back as she's going in obedience, right? And of course, throughout this context, what we read is God telling her to go back to submit. Well, wait a minute, bro. You just said that was an abusive space. You just said that was a very, very crazy space to be in for Hagar. Why would God encourage that for her? And although I hear your point, I want to raise something else different to you. That it was less about what she was having to go back and submit to as much as it was her being obedient and trusting God's direction and provision for her at this current juncture in her life. Is she going to trust God with the next steps and next direction, even though the emotional experience she carried was more of a negative one caused by Sarai and Abram? Now, I want to give you some cultural context to this text, because even at this time, of course, there were a lot of women, a lot of people, whether it was polygamous marriages. You got to think about the culture that Abraham is surrounded by in this time. Okay. Yahweh, God of Israel, Elohim, right? Like he hasn't yet established a lot of what we would later read in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers in terms of the law, right? He hasn't really established that yet. So there's a lot of different experiences and religious practices happening around Abraham that is more centered on polyamorous practices, okay? That is all sourced in a polytheistic religion. So these people believe, there's so many people that believe in more than one God in this time. And so the idea of there only being one God, that is far different. That is far different from what's actually being experienced in this space among the other nations. Again, this isn't even the point in argument that Genesis is even trying to make. However, this is helpful to understand the context, because what I would tell you is that the main consensus from this text is that it is simply better to wait on God than it is to try to configure something else for yourself. Like, that's the main consensus of the text. But to look at the implicit plugins from around this entire perspective, she's going back. Obviously, this is still a part of the context. She's going back to a place where her provisions are going to be met. She's going to be sheltered. She's going to have food, okay, because she's going to be included into the family picture of Abram and Sarai, while Hagar, her, is pregnant with now Abram's son. Not only is he encouraging her to go back according to the cultural context, but he's also giving her the opportunity to choose to trust him. Hey, I've got your next steps here, and I want you to trust me for that direction because I've got you covered. To which Hagar listens and moves in obedience and goes where God instructs her. That is where we pivot to see you, because a lot of us have looked at this story and we saw it more along the lines of, hey, you don't want to step outside of God's, arrangements and God's alignment. And hey, God says, wait, we need to wait, and we don't need to try to do it our way. That's a beautiful takeaway. I believe that is explicitly in the text. You know what else is also in the text? Putting your feet in the shoes of Hagar and saying, wow, I mean, I may not have necessarily dealt with baby mama drama or baby daddy drama or anything like that, to the extent of like being forced out the house and then having to go back and all those kinds of things. No, I haven't been there. But you know what? I have been through a heartbreak where the emotions were so overwhelming because of the pain I experienced from that moment of the rejection, being told I wasn't wanted, being told that they're not interested in me, being told that I brought no value, being told that I am a waste of space, I'm worthless, being told on the way out that something that doesn't match the identity of what I've always known myself to be. Maybe you went through a breakup and you questioned your worth, you questioned your value, you questioned the legitimacy of who you are and your identity. Maybe it wasn't a rejection or a breakup as much as it was a sexual assault, a traumatic wound, molestation. You went through some extreme pains that definitely left some emotional craters that caused you to question your worth, caused you to question so much about who you are. And so there were patterns that were starting to show up in you that led you to handle it in a specific way. And so what you did was, yes, you ran out of the environment, but you didn't really run from it because it was still something that was attached to your heart. You might have separated yourself out of the physical environment, but that doesn't mean what happened in the physical environment separated you, because it's still something that was wounded enough in your heart and in your soul that kept it cratered, that kept it something that was just nagging and tugging at you repeatedly, that allowed those thoughts to race in your mind, to question your value, that allowed those thoughts to make you feel that you were only good enough for the experiment and experience that you had with somebody who misused you and abused you, who mistreated you, even those who should have loved you, who should have been there for you, who should have protected you, who should have made you feel safe, and yet they weren't there, and they were the ones that led the trauma, that put it in you, that placed it in you, and it sucks. It sucks. And those are the types of things that we've experienced that we can allow ourselves to see through Hagar and say, yo, I've made the same decision where there was an emotional wound that took place and I just took off. I didn't know where I was going, but I just took off. And I ended up somewhere a lot deeper than maybe where Hagar did, but it was all from an emotional response. I didn't know what else to do. No one taught me how to process my emotions. No one taught me how to actually address this stuff. So I just ran, and I've been running. And now when I sit down and I think about it, and I actually look at what Hagar did and I choose to apply it myself, I'm like, yo, man, where did I come from and where am I going? And that's the question I want to raise to you. Where all this running, all these mechanisms you've used to escape from your emotions, you've turned to the masturbation, you've turned to the pornography, you've turned to the sex to feel anything different than the emotional experiences you've had. You've turned to overworking. You've turned to the money. You've turned to getting your status up. You've turned to OnlyFans. You've turned to all these different things. You've even gotten married at the expense of escaping an emotional wound. You got in a whole full-blown long-term relationship to escape from a wound, to erase it, to act like it never happened. Well, if I get with this person, then you know what? I can just forget all about it. I have 2 years down the line. Hey, we won't even think about it. Right? You don't even like them. You just know that this is somebody that you feel comfortable enough to get over the past relationship with, not somebody you actually want to build a life with. Like there are so many decisions that we will make from an emotional space that's so chaotic, and it leads us to so many places. And what I'm encouraging us to do from this text is to replicate what Hagar did. And even though the Holy Spirit, the angel of the Lord, is said to have found her, she sits down long enough to not just entertain the question, but to listen to what God has to say for next steps on where to go. And so she's on the run, and her response is to sit down, entertain the question of where you're going, where you're coming from, and where you're going. That then leads her to change direction, go back in obedience to God. The key thing is being obedient to God in the next steps and direction that he had for her. So the question that we're parked at here is, where are you coming from and where are you going? That's really the biggest thing. And even in the midst of answering this question, what God makes room for is your emotional state of mind. No matter how much you feel about it, good, bad, or indifferent, God creates space for you to get that off your chest and to allow that to be heard and seen. There's a reason why Hagar says, you're the God who sees me. He didn't just give her flippant thoughts. He didn't just randomly answer her. No, he spoke directly to the things that she was dealing with internally. He actually connected with her and saw her where she was. And that's exactly what God offers to you, not just from a direct personal relationship to him, but also through community. Group of people who are safe, who come together and say, man, I see you. I hear you. And God offers healing through such words, such spaces. creating such safety for you to actually no longer be in a space where you're living life on the run. Because it gets tiring, it gets exhausting. And if we stop, take a breath, just stop. All the busyness, stop. All the excess relationships, stop. All the going out, just stop. Sit in for a night. You know what I'm saying? Sit in for a night before you get out of your bedroom. You know what I'm saying? Like, take a minute, take some deep breaths, ground yourself in the present. All this hurrying that we're operating in, all this wondering what's next and how am I going to get this and how am I going to get that, and running on the go. And we are so used to being on the go that we've convinced ourselves that I can't possibly carve out 10 minutes for God. I can't possibly carve out a few minutes to just sit in silence. But in reality, we're using that to rationalize the idea that we just don't really want to sit with our emotions because there's too much to start. And perhaps that's where you're at. And my encouragement is that when you start with just simply sitting with him, even as uncomfortable as it might be, and maybe even some spaces where you don't even know what to say, we're actually putting ourselves in position to get our peace back. Because that's ultimately what God desires for you, is not for you to live a life on the run, but for you to actually live a life at rest. Matthew 11:28, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. God gives us rest. And rest does not equate to living life on the run. And so in order for you to get that rest, you've got to be willing to sit down and consider some things, reflect on some things. Therapy might be something, coaching, counseling, all that, communities. Yes, because that is how we're going to get into a healthy space, by sitting down, reflecting, and sitting with what we've experienced. Acknowledging it, being honest about what we feel, being honest about, bro, I'm telling you, that is how we got to do it. And Hagar lays out the blueprint by simply engaging with conversation with God and stopping in the midst of her running to give her ear to what God has to say. What's happening, fam? Thank you so much for tuning in to this video. If you want to watch the full replay of this entire conversation, I'm sure it's popped up somewhere on this screen, so be sure to click that. But also, if you guys are interested in joining a free safe space for men community designed to help you heal and get your life back on track in 4 dimensions of faith, relationships, energy, and economics, click the link in the description below and be sure to sign up and join in this community so we can connect and get back on track to getting you back. Be easy.